and you have people in the US speaking with like an open eliminationist rhetoric about their fellow countrymen. And those people are not just random strangers. They're like people in Congress, big name journalists, people in think tanks going, oh, you know, the American people are tired of the unvaccinated. We need some sort of final solution. And it's David fucking Frum saying that stuff. The thing to keep in mind here, and this is the most important point, is that, you know, empires at the later stages of their lifetime, they do come home. But, like, this is not something that rejuvenates them, that makes them go Super Saiyan, like in Dragon Ball or whatever, where you unlock the power of the Dragon Balls. No, like, the empire comes home, and all of the weakness and dysfunctionality and so on that made it fail abroad is retained. And it actually gets worse. It doesn't get better when it comes home. It actually gets a lot worse. For pretty normal reasons. Like, these are the same people using the exact same institutions. Like, they don't want to abolish these institutions because they have, like, all of these vested institutional interests. So the CIA that failed in Afghanistan is the same CIA that's gonna, you know, make sure that the American Taliban don't ever retake Kandahar. And if you go into this with some sort of assumption that, no, they're gonna be hyper competent because they're evil. Like, no, This is a cope. And I think it's a pretty natural cope in a way, because if you ask any Russian, again, I think I've made this point before, but it bears restating. If you ask any Russian, like, would you live in the sort of gray Soviet tyranny of the 70s where you had no political freedom? Or would you live in the cool 90s where, you know, Gorbachev makes Pizza Hut commercials? And you have the freedom to go with toppings all the way out to the crust. If you can afford that stuff, which you can't because, like, the monetary system has basically collapsed. And people are getting paid in bottles of vodka if they're getting paid at all. Or in coffins because, spoiler alert, coffins are surprisingly useful. Like, you can find a lot of use for coffins in 90s Russia, like burying people. That keep dying for various reasons.
Yeah, didn't their life expectancy go down into the 50s?
Yeah,
and that, like, that's crazy for the leader of the second world at the time, and like just suddenly now you're sub-Saharan Africa to your life expectancy.
Yeah, I mean, I had an argument about this with someone, some American, who said, like, no, you don't understand. Like, the 90s are already here in the U.S. because if you look at, you know, the poorer parts where there's a lot of fentanyl, like, you know, it's a fucking mess, like, demographically speaking. And yes, it is. But it can get so much worse. Like, in the worst places in the US with, like, dropping life expectancy, you are basically approaching the level of Russia. But you have to remember that, like, for Russia, this stuff didn't happen just for former miners in the Urals or whatever. Like, this happened for the entire society, like that sort of catastrophe. And the US is not there yet. But the reason I bring the Russian 90s up is because, like, anyone who's lived through that crap, for almost anyone, maybe not the oligarchs, but pretty much every normal person who's not a member of the elite, but just an average sort of working stiff, like, living under the unfreedom of a working sort of communist tyranny is so much preferable to living under, you know, a completely non-operative, dysfunctional kleptocracy oligarchy. Like, it's not even close. Then if you look at the US today, like, you in theory, you have all these freedoms. You can say whatever you want, except that, you know, free speech in the US is, like, now officially sort of Idi Amin, the former dictator of Uganda, who says, you know, I guarantee every Ugandan citizen freedom of speech, but I don't guarantee them freedom after speech. Or in the liberal parlance, like, you don't have freedom from consequences of your speech, dude. Like, that's not the same thing. Like, people are openly saying that. So all of these cool metaphorical concepts, like, liberals don't believe in them, think they're evil, and are sort of trampling on them with impunity. So a lot of the time you can trade those things in for, you know, having a job, being able to go to the hospital, maybe not starving to death. And that's kind of what disappeared in the 90s. So for people, like, the big sort of nightmare scenario is not actually living in, like, a functioning tyranny. Like, a functioning tyranny, a lot of people can just say, yeah, this is pretty nice. I don't care about politics, but the trains run on time. A non-functioning oligarchy is so much worse.